pienen kapakan. Ratsuani juoksuun hoputan. Tuiskaa hiljaa arot tuulit hymyratset punakuulit tyttöjä, jota yksin rakastan.
The Congress of Pagans, a truly amazing moment for world peace. Japsky's laughing with Trooparians, Ruskovan's drinking with Euroslavs, and Memestani's freaking out over... Maryvania bringing a gun? Huh?
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, everyone was having a great time. Nothing could possibly go wrong, right? The victors of the Great Premi War all sat around the conference table discussing how the world map should be reshaped for the future. Eventually leading to the Treaty of Pagans, it was signed and it finalized this map. So let's take a look at all the main changes. Ruskova, being the second biggest nation already, was discouraged from taking huge lands and would only gain a small colony in northern Premi known as Von Bureau, as well as the Advantage exclave towards its north. Japsky would also gain a small ice colony in the north, known as Dogland, as well as this huge land inside Premi with no coastal access. For some fucking reason, I don't know who wrote this shit. But Dogland would later be given over to Trooparians due to Japsky's financial struggles. Maryvania and Eriksville would take the remainder of the northwestern coast in Von Bureau and Dogland. Emania would also somehow expand, and big waves of Japsky migration began as Emania began being viewed as a more financially stable New Punjabi promised land. That doesn't sound bad at all, right? Angolistan would also gain lands on the southern coast, and Pagan would also gain lands in the east. Gary Nation would make huge expansions in the south, annexing many lands with ethnic Garians who were trapped inside of Premi. And now it's time for the big changes. These are the 3 new nations that would form. A key event of the Congress of Pagans was Memestani relocation. The Memestani question was a big debate in Angolish politics as the Civil War devastated their economy and many Angolish people were fucking pissed at the minor gains during the Premi War. In order to create peace between the powers, they all decided to forcibly move the Memestani people to the core of Premi. This was very complicated because a lot of Memestanis agreed and they wanted to seek a new life, while many others harshly resisted. However, eventually Angolistan would be united and a new Memestan was born in former Premi, and it would even be gifted the old capital of Panovsky, now known as Memestan City. A new Finnish state is created by Maryvanian and Angolistan giving up some lands. The new country now has a coastline and can take an even greater stance in global affairs. And finally, a new nation known as Yugoslavia was created, made of many Slavic and Doglandian peoples in northern Premi. It would be a relatively weak nation, however it would hold great potential, with great lands and industrial capacity. But just what happened to the ethnic Premis? Well, many fled to regions like Dogland and Gary Nation, and many escaped to the old Advantage exclave, as these regions had much less Premi racism. However, most, they were forced to assimilate into new cultures with their customs being taken away. This process took a few generations, but within a few decades, the Premi people, for the most part, stopped existing. But anyway, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. This is the new map of Pagan, and as you can imagine, not everyone was happy. The Doglandians were furious that they were sidelined during the Congress and they weren't given an independent state like the Yugoslavs. Once Dogland was traded over to Trooparia, the Trooparians were not nice to the ethnic Doglandians. Eventually, Doglandians had enough. A new figure rose to prominence named ML5, who had various speeches about Doglandian sovereignty and independence. And so began the Dogland Independence War. Eventually, Trooparia and Dogland agreed to part ways and a new state is recognized. Maryvania would also have huge unrest, with a civil war beginning. The war was caused by rebels trying to overthrow the communist government, as following the Great Premi War, many governments seemed very weak. The government would succeed in crushing it. It was kind of easy, embarrassingly so. Even the huge Ruskova nation couldn't avoid the rampant instability of the era. With the old Premi exclave having huge gatherings between high-ranking officers, they began a scheme to rebrand the whole national identity as, instead of Premi, they would be Advantian. And they began arming themselves and they declared independence as the Advantage Republic. Now, Ruskova was way too fucking broke. After the Premi War, they just didn't have any money, so they didn't want to keep an exclave full of Premies under its rule, and negotiations would begin, leading to an independent, advantaged state. In the meantime, a small nation of random islanders known as Euonia would form. It's not very relevant, but I figured I'd mention it. Did the last Maryvanian Civil War not satisfy you? Well, don't worry, because we have a second one. Not even 2 years passed, and Maryvania would experience trouble yet again. Another civil war. These will be quite frequent throughout history, by the way, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. However, the police would kill a dog named Betsy outside of a university, causing a student uprising against the communist government. What is going on? Eventually, the government would succeed in pushing them back yet again. Japsky also was not spared. As the Premi War fully bankrupted the nation, it was forced to sell Dogland to Truperia, and the leader Japsky Collapse became super trigger happy, organizing mass purges against opponents. Now this is where the story gets very cheeky. Following the collapse of Premi, many high-ranking Premi officials fled to Gary Nation and Dogland, as they were much more relaxed on Premi criminals compared to the fucking horrors Memistan and Yugoslavia did. Many of these Premi officials got cozy with the government of these countries, especially Gary Nation, and they started influencing the politics. This led to the Dogger Accords, which was a secret alliance between Dogland and Garian. Now, how does this relate to Japsky? Well, the Japo exclave was something Dogland started eyeing up and wanted to find ways to get without risking war. Gary Nation proposed they should ally Truperia, and all of 3 of them would stage an operation to rip Japsky apart. Truperia quickly agreed. He just wanted lands, man. Eventually, after more purges by Tukral, the people started rising up. Large riots across Japsky cities like Ludhiana. Just as these began, the Truperian army began sweeping across the north of the country. Dogland invaded the enclave via paratroops. They took it so easily. Meanwhile, in secret, the Garians would fund a specific Japsky rebel known as Piyush Joshi. Now, Piyush Joshi promised to sell over all Japsky resources to Gary Nation if he could just gain power in Japsky. And just like that, full-scale war that bankrupted the entire Japsky government, and they could not fight. Soon, Tukral escaped to Ruskova, and a new Japsky dictatorship was born. Truperia, Dogland, and Garian all got exactly what they wanted. And with this, Dogland and the UGL, they showed us their cunningness and their will to take over other nations. And they were not going to stop here. So join us next time on the next episode of Pagan Map, where we will see the rise of Gary Nation and Dogland. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye.
Se pienen kapakan, ratsuani juoksuun hoputan,